there's presence and something traumatic happens, we split off the past, like we split off and overwhelm. There's a fragmentation. It's a high level of stress, numbing. And we create a mirror world, like a fake future, that is needed to integrate that past back into presence. In the moment we have two, we have a question and an answer. So the past, a mirror world, which is kind of an imaginary future. But from that moment on, we can't, where our trauma lives, we can't be fully present because we are dealing with the symptoms either of numbness, indifference, absence, or hyperactivation, reactivity, a lot of stress. So we live either in the past or in the future, imaginary future. The healing of trauma creates presence, unifies these two forces into presence. And presence is post-traumatic learning. Every time we heal trauma, we learn something. We become literally bigger. Our perspective grows, our vitality, our creativity, our relationality grows. So that's in a, of course, very short and simplified, that's trauma itself. But since I've been working in the last 2 decades a lot on collective wounds, it got very clear to me through the work, through the groups and large-scale events, like how we all have been born into a pre-traumatized world, that the individual trauma is one aspect, but the trauma is in the water that we grew up, inherently included through our ancestors, cultures, large-scale wounds and traumatizations in our cultures. So, but what happens when we grow up in a world where people don't explain to us that certain things we saw as children were clearly trauma symptoms? We saw it in our parents, we saw it in our teachers, we saw it in the society around us. We see it daily in politics. We see it in so many systems, in the education system, in the healthcare system. We see it all over. But it hasn't been named. And not only it hasn't been named, it has been normalized because it's easy to say, that's how life is. That's how life is. People yell at each other. Politics means people fighting and screaming and dismissing each other. Like how children getting beaten, racism, anti-Semitism, like so many symptoms. And so I want to put our attention to, because the trauma that we experienced in our biography, we have a tracking device most of the time, except it was so strong that we forgot about it altogether. But the trauma that was here before we came in was part of the water that we came into. And that needs to be changed. That's not how life is. There's partly how life is, and the other part is that's how life is when it's hurt. And once I can name that, that's how life is when it's hurt, we can become the cure for it. But if it's normalized, we don't take care of it, because that's how life is. So what I'm pointing to is reading the cultural and societal symptoms of trauma that are so prevalent that they become normal because we share them. We grew up in it. We've been conditioned by it, and that's why sometimes we can't even see it. And then when something big happens, we don't only feel the effects of our personal attachment or shock trauma or abuse or whatever happened to us, also the collective load that was here before we came in, our ancestral load starts to resonate. And that heavily affects our capacity to respond, like our response ability. Because my ability to respond needs me to be able to have the experience. Otherwise, I react. And so we could say, in a lovely metaphor, we could say that when snowflakes fall into a river, they become water. But when snowflakes fall onto an iced over river, the snow piles up. So experience within an integrated nervous system becomes water. But experience in an iced over nervous system creates pressure and follow-up layers. So we create sandwiches, trauma sandwiches. And we can't digest the experience because it doesn't go in. We all know when we have conversations where in relationships where one says something, the other one says something, but it's already blocked. It doesn't go in. The in formation doesn't go in. So it's not an in formation, it's an out formation, but no in. But inform means, like when I look at Maurizio or Zaya, then Maurizio lives in my central nervous system. His social agency informs Thomas. And if I allow it, this gives me a lot of information about Maurizio because it's in my central nervous system. It's in my body, it's in my emotions, it's in my intellectual capacity, in my perception. But information, social agency or social information that hits my trauma doesn't go in. It stays in front of the door because here is my defense. Here say stop. And when Maurizio lives in Thomas, the clearer is the moon on the surface of the lake. That's called intimacy. So the clearer is Maurizio, that is out there. In Thomas, the more congruent the two are, we call it intimate. So we have each other inside. That's how we know each other. That's why relationality is so important. Because in that inner representation, from early on, that's why I said at the beginning, we all grew up in being felt or not so much. Growing up in being felt by our parents creates safety. Growing up in not so much or very little creates a lot of fear and anxiety and stress. So I feel you feeling me creates a deep sense of safety. But I don't feel you when I talk with you creates already like a distance. And often when we witness collective events, there's a lot of distance involved because it's very overwhelming. Because the information of the war is also living in my central nervous system. And that's a lot. And we all developed ways how not to feel, how to numb ourselves, how to distance ourselves, how to disembody ourselves, how to be so activated that I can't live anymore like this because I'm so full of fear or stress. That's why the high art is how to find regulation in relation. Regulation in relation.